My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what you are about to hear was never meant to feel ordinary. There are moments when heaven allows a hidden truth to rise to the surface, not to frighten you, not to punish anyone, but to finally explain why a certain connection has felt so impossible to understand. You may have been wondering why your soulmate became distant. Why they questioned your intentions. Why they suddenly needed proof. Why someone who once looked at you with tenderness could suddenly behave as though your love was something they needed to investigate. And perhaps you thought the answer was simple. Maybe they stopped believing in you. Maybe someone poisoned their mind. Maybe they found another person. Maybe they decided you were pretending. But there is something you did not know. They did not simply walk away. They secretly went looking for someone who could prove that you were fake. They wanted evidence. They wanted confirmation that their feelings for you had been built on an illusion. They wanted someone to tell them that you were not the person their heart believed you were. And my child, that is where this story changes completely. Because the person they hired did not give them the answer they expected. She gave them something far more painful. She gave them the truth. And when that truth began unfolding, your soulmate could not hold themselves together. They cried. Not for a few minutes. Not because of embarrassment. Not because someone had insulted them. They cried because they realized they had spent so much time doubting the one person whose heart had never stopped reaching for them. So pause here for another moment. Breathe. Let the noise around you become quiet. Because in this fictional spiritual message, imagine heaven pulling back a curtain that has been covering a story you were never allowed to see from the beginning. Your soulmate had been fighting a battle you could not see. And the strange thing is, they were not fighting you. They were fighting what they were afraid to believe about you. For a long time, they had carried a question inside themselves. What if this person is not real? What if the connection is only in my head? What if everything I feel is just wishful thinking? What if I open my heart and discover that I was fooled? They never told you how deeply those questions were hurting them. Instead, they became colder. They became quieter. They started analyzing your words. They watched how quickly you replied. They noticed when you disappeared. They remembered tiny changes in your voice. They replayed conversations after they ended. They examined your expressions. They searched for contradictions. And every time you behaved in a way they could not understand, their fear whispered the same thing. See? You knew it. Something is wrong. But their heart whispered something completely different. No. There is something here. That conflict exhausted them. They could not sleep properly. They would lie awake remembering moments with you that should have been meaningless but somehow felt unforgettable. A sentence you said casually. A look you gave them. A moment when you seemed to understand their pain without being told. A strange coincidence. A feeling that appeared before they even knew why. They tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were imagining everything. But the more they tried to erase the connection, the stronger it seemed to become. That is why they eventually made a decision. They contacted a psychic. Not because they trusted her completely. They contacted her because they wanted her to destroy the hope they secretly could not destroy themselves. Think about that for a moment. They were not searching for love. They were searching for permission to stop loving you. They wanted someone else to say, "You are imagining this. Walk away." And if they had received that answer, perhaps they would have accepted it. Perhaps they would have finally convinced themselves that you were nothing more than a chapter they needed to close. So they arranged the meeting. They did not tell many people. In fact, they kept it almost completely secret. They chose a quiet place away from the people who knew them. The room was small, dimly lit, and unusually silent. Your soulmate entered carrying an emotional weight they had been hiding for months. The psychic looked at them for a long moment before saying anything. She did not immediately ask about you. She did not need your name. She simply watched your soulmate sit down. And then she asked a strange question. Why are you so desperate for me to tell you that this person is lying? Your soulmate froze. They had not expected that. They had prepared themselves to explain everything. They had prepared screenshots, memories, dates, conversations, doubts, and questions. But before they could even present them, the psychic had already sensed the desperation behind the investigation. Your soulmate swallowed. I just need to know if they are real. The psychic looked at them carefully. Real in what way? Real in their feelings. Silence. And what if they are? Your soulmate looked away. That would make everything harder. Those words revealed more than any evidence could. Because deep inside, they already knew. They were not afraid that you were fake. They were afraid that you were real. Real love would require courage. Real love would require vulnerability. Real love would require them to admit that they had been wrong about you. And perhaps most painfully, real love would require them to confront the reasons they had pushed you away. The psychic asked them to place a photograph of you on the table. Your soulmate hesitated. Then slowly, they placed it there. The moment the photograph touched the table, the atmosphere changed. The psychic became unusually quiet. She studied the picture. Then she looked back at your soulmate. Tell me what happened between you. Your soulmate began explaining. But halfway through the story, their voice cracked. They said you had changed. They said you had become distant. They said they could not understand your silence. They said there were moments when they felt deeply connected to you and other moments when they felt completely shut out. They said they suspected you were hiding something. And then they finally admitted the sentence they had been afraid to say aloud. I think they never loved me. The psychic did not respond immediately. Instead, she asked. Then why are you crying? Your soulmate wiped their face. They had not even realized they were crying. That was the first crack in the wall. The psychic leaned forward. You did not come here to prove that they are fake. Your soulmate stared at her. You came here because you are afraid they are genuine. The room became silent. And something inside your soulmate broke. Because those words went directly to the place they had been protecting. They had spent so long accusing you in their mind that they had forgotten to ask themselves why they cared so much. Why did your silence hurt? Why did your distance matter? Why did the possibility of losing you terrify them? Why did every new person they met somehow fail to create the same feeling? Why did they keep returning to memories of you? The psychic closed her eyes for a moment. Then she said something that your soulmate would remember for the rest of their life. This person does not feel fake. Your soulmate looked up. The psychic continued. This person feels wounded. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. Wounded by whom? The psychic looked directly at them. You. Those words landed like thunder. Your soulmate immediately shook their head. No. I never tried to hurt them. The psychic calmly replied. I did not say you intended to hurt them. I said they were hurt. And suddenly, memories began rushing through your soulmate's mind. Every time you waited. Every time you tried to explain. Every time you gave them another chance. Every time you swallowed your own pain. Every time you acted strong when you were actually breaking inside. They remembered moments they had dismissed. Messages they had ignored. Questions they had avoided. Apologies they had never given. They remembered the look on your face when they walked away. And suddenly, the story they had created about you began collapsing. The psychic asked. Did this person ever ask you for something impossible? No. Did they demand that you become someone else? No. Did they try to control your life? No. Then why did you decide they were fake? Your soulmate had no answer. They looked down. And for the first time, they understood that suspicion had not come from evidence. It had come from fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of betrayal. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear that something beautiful could be taken away. And the psychic had not finished. She told your soulmate that there was something unusual about the connection. She said that whenever they tried to emotionally disconnect from you, something inside them resisted. Not because they were trapped. Not because they were cursed. But because unresolved emotions do not disappear simply because people stop speaking. The connection remained in their thoughts because the story was unfinished. Your soulmate asked, "Does that mean we are meant to be together?" The psychic paused. Then she answered carefully. "No one can promise you that. But I can tell you something else." "What?" "You have been running from the wrong question." Your soulmate stared at her. "The question is not whether this person is fake." The psychic's voice softened. "The question is why you needed them to be fake so badly." And that sentence destroyed the final piece of their defense. Your soulmate began crying again. This time they could not stop. Hours passed. They talked. They remembered. They confessed things they had never told anyone. They admitted that they had sometimes checked your profile without contacting you. They admitted that they had typed messages and deleted them. They admitted that they had imagined what would happen if you suddenly moved on. They admitted that the thought of seeing you happy with someone else made their chest feel heavy. They admitted that they had acted indifferent because admitting they cared felt too dangerous. And then came the revelation that changed everything. The psychic asked your soulmate to think about the earliest moment they felt something unusual about you. Your soulmate closed their eyes. They remembered. It was not the most romantic moment. It was something simple. Maybe a conversation. Maybe a glance. Maybe a moment when everyone else misunderstood them and you somehow did not. The memory returned with startling clarity. And the psychic said, "That is why you cannot make yourself believe this was meaningless." Your soulmate whispered, "I thought I was imagining it." The psychic answered, "You may have misunderstood it, but you did not imagine what you felt." Those words became unbearable. Because your soulmate suddenly realized something. They had been trying to prove that the connection was false when the real problem was that they did not know how to handle something that felt deeper than their usual experiences. They had mistaken intensity for danger. They had mistaken uncertainty for deception. They had mistaken vulnerability for weakness. And they had mistaken your silence for proof that you did not care. But there was still one thing bothering them. They looked at the psychic and asked, "Then why did they pull away from me?" The psychic became quiet. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she answered, "Because they believed you had already chosen to leave." Your soulmate's face changed. "What?" "They pulled away because they thought they were protecting themselves." The room seemed to become smaller. Your soulmate remembered all those moments when you appeared distant. They had interpreted them as rejection. But perhaps you had been responding to rejection you believed had already happened. Two people. Both afraid. Both waiting. Both interpreting silence as an answer. Both thinking the other had stopped caring. And neither one brave enough to say what they truly felt. Your soulmate covered their face with their hands. They cried again. But this time, the tears were different. They were not tears of suspicion. They were tears of realization. They suddenly understood how easily two people can love each other while standing on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding. The psychic waited. Then she said, "There is more." Your soulmate looked up. What more? The psychic picked up the photograph again. She studied it carefully. Then she said, "You have been asking me to look at their energy." "Yes. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "You are the one carrying the heavier conflict." Your soulmate became silent. The psychic explained that the person they were investigating did not feel like someone manipulating them for attention. Instead, the emotional pattern looked like someone who had repeatedly tried to detach because they were afraid of being rejected. Your soulmate whispered. So they were hurting too? Yes. That single word shattered them. Because they had imagined themselves as the only wounded person in the story. They had never stopped to consider that you might have been silently suffering too. They had been so focused on proving your intentions that they had forgotten you had a heart that could break. A heart that could become tired. A heart that could eventually stop chasing. And then the psychic said something that made your soulmate sit upright. If you continue waiting for proof, you may eventually receive the only proof you never wanted. What proof? That they learned to live without you. Your soulmate went completely still. The psychic continued. People sometimes wait for certainty until the person they love stops waiting for them. Those words created a new fear. Not the fear of being deceived. The fear of being too late. Your soulmate suddenly imagined a future where you had moved on. Where your phone no longer mattered to them. Where your name no longer made their heart race. Where someone else received the tenderness they had once taken for granted. Where you looked happy. Not pretending. Not trying to make them jealous. Actually happy. The thought was unbearable. They stood up suddenly. I need to call them. The psychic stopped them. Not yet. Why? Because you are emotional. I don't care. You should. Your soulmate stared at her. If you call from fear, you may say the wrong thing. Then what am I supposed to do? The psychic looked at them with compassion. First, tell the truth to yourself. Your soulmate sat back down. What truth? That you never actually wanted proof that they were fake. Silence. You wanted proof that it was safe to love them. Your soulmate began crying again. And this time they did not fight the tears. They allowed everything to come out. The doubt. The jealousy. The regret. The longing. The fear. The love. Everything. Hours passed in that room. And somewhere during those hours, your soulmate realized something even more painful. They had been expecting the psychic to expose you. Instead, the psychic had exposed them. Not their secrets to the world. Their secrets to themselves. The parts of their heart they had hidden. The fears they had disguised as logic. The love they had disguised as suspicion. The longing they had disguised as anger. And the regret they had disguised as distance. But the night was not finished. Because the psychic suddenly asked one final question. Do you still want me to prove that this person is fake? Your soulmate looked at the photograph. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then they whispered. No. The psychic waited. Your soulmate touched the photograph gently. I just want to know if I ruined it. The room became silent. And that was the moment the psychic finally understood what your soulmate had been carrying all along. They were not afraid of discovering that you had lied. They were afraid of discovering that they had pushed away someone who had been telling the truth. The psychic's expression softened. You cannot change what you already did. Your soulmate's eyes filled again. But you can decide what you do next. That sentence became the beginning of something new. Not a guarantee. Not a promise that everything would magically return to the way it was. But a realization. A door had opened. Your soulmate understood that if they wanted another chance, They could not approach you with accusations. They could not demand proof. They could not expect you to erase the pain they had caused. They would have to approach you with honesty, with humility, with accountability, and most importantly, without pretending they had never been afraid. The psychic gathered the photograph and handed it back. Your soulmate took it carefully. Before leaving, they asked one final question. Do you think they still love me? The psychic did not answer immediately. She looked at them. Then she said, I think the more important question is whether you are finally ready to love them without testing them. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. They knew. They had been testing you. Testing your patience. Testing your loyalty. Testing whether you would chase. Testing whether you would stay. Testing whether you would prove yourself. And in doing so, they had slowly turned love into an examination you never agreed to take. They walked out of that room carrying the photograph. But they were no longer carrying the same belief. They had entered wanting evidence against you. They left carrying evidence against their own fear. Outside, the night air was cold. They stood beside their car for several minutes. Their phone was in their hand. Your name was on the screen. They opened your conversation. They typed. I need to tell you something. They stared at it. Deleted it. Typed again. I was wrong. Deleted it. Again. I miss you. Deleted it. Then finally, they typed the words they had been too proud to say. I was scared. Their thumb hovered over the send button. They could have sent it. But they did not. Not yet. Because suddenly they remembered the psychic's warning. Do not approach them from panic. Approach them from truth. So they locked the phone. They looked toward the dark sky. And for the first time in a long time, they whispered your name without anger. Without suspicion. Without trying to control the outcome. Just longing. Just regret. Just truth. Meanwhile, you had no idea what had happened that night. You did not know that someone had spent hours examining the emotional story between you. You did not know that your soulmate had gone there expecting to hear that you were fake. You did not know that they had cried while remembering things you thought they had forgotten. You did not know that someone had finally told them what you could never convince them to believe. You did not know that their greatest fear was no longer that you had deceived them. Their greatest fear was that they had lost you. And perhaps that is why heaven allowed this fictional story to reach you now. Not to tell you to chase someone. Not to tell you to wait forever. Not to tell you that another person's choices are guaranteed. But to remind you of something powerful. Sometimes people accuse what they secretly fear losing. Sometimes distance is not proof of indifference. Sometimes silence hides emotions that a person is not mature enough to express. And sometimes the person who seems least affected is the person fighting the hardest battle inside. But there is another truth you must hear. Do not abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to find courage. Your heart deserves honesty. Your love deserves reciprocity. Your peace deserves protection. If someone returns, let them return with truth. Let them return with accountability. Let them return with actions strong enough to support their words. You do not need to prove your worth to someone who once doubted it. You do not need to beg someone to recognize what you carry. You do not need to become smaller so another person can feel safer. And you certainly do not need to chase. Because in this story, the person who went searching for proof against you discovered something they never expected. They discovered that the real illusion was the story fear had created inside their own mind. They thought you were pretending. They discovered they were protecting themselves. They thought you were hiding something. They discovered they were hiding from vulnerability. They thought you were the reason they were hurting. They discovered that some of their deepest wounds existed long before you arrived. And perhaps the most painful realization of all was this. You were never asking them to be perfect. You were only asking them to be honest. The night ended. But the story did not. Because the next morning, your soulmate woke up with the same photograph beside them. They stared at it. They remembered the psychic's words. They remembered your face. They remembered every opportunity they had ignored. Then they opened their phone again. Your name was still there. And this time, they did not type a message. They did something more difficult. They began writing the truth. Not a dramatic confession. Not a manipulative apology. Not a message designed to make you chase them. A real confession. They wrote about the fear. They wrote about the suspicion. They wrote about the mistakes. They wrote about the moments when they missed you but refused to admit it. They wrote about how they had tried to convince themselves that you were fake because accepting that you were genuine would mean confronting everything they had done. And at the very end, they wrote one sentence. I don't know whether I still have a place in your life, but I finally understand why I was afraid to ask. Their finger moved toward send. Then stopped. Because another thought entered their mind. What if you had truly moved on? What if you no longer wanted them? What if the message arrived too late? And that fear brought them back to the same crossroads. Send it. Or stay silent. For several seconds, they did nothing. Then something unexpected happened. A notification appeared. Your name. Your message. Your soulmate stared at the screen as if time had stopped. Their hands began trembling. They opened it. And whatever they read caused the color to leave their face. They read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. Their eyes filled with tears. Because your message contained something they had never expected. Something that answered the question they had been too afraid to ask. Something that made them realize the psychic had only uncovered half of the truth. Your message said. And this is where you must pause. Because the words on that screen were not angry. They were not desperate. They were not begging. They were not even asking them to come back. They were words from someone who had finally reached the point where love could no longer survive without truth. Your soulmate read the message again. And suddenly they understood why you had been silent. They understood why you had stopped explaining yourself. They understood why you had stopped chasing. They understood why your energy had changed. Because while they were secretly hiring someone to prove that you were fake, you had already been quietly preparing to let them go. And now they were standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. Would they finally step forward with the truth? Or would fear convince them to disappear again? The phone remained in their hand. Their tears fell onto the screen. They whispered your name. And then, for the first time, they pressed the button they had been too afraid to press. Send. The message left their phone. And somewhere between the moment it disappeared from their screen and the moment it reached yours, the entire story seemed to hold its breath. Because the next thing that happened was not something your soulmate expected. It was not something the psychic had predicted. And it was not something you were prepared to see. A second message arrived. This one was not from your soulmate. It was from the psychic. And the message contained only 7 words. Tell them what you never told anyone. Your soulmate stared at those words. Their face went pale. Because they suddenly remembered one final secret. A secret they had never told you. A secret they had never told their family. A secret they had never even admitted completely to themselves. And if they revealed it now, there would be no way to return to the life they had been pretending to live. Their hands began shaking. They opened your conversation again. They started typing. Stopped. Deleted. Typed again. And finally, they wrote the one confession that could either heal the deepest wound between you, or prove that they had waited far too long. They pressed send. And as your phone began to light up, you had absolutely no idea that the next message you were about to read would finally reveal why your soulmate had been fighting so hard to convince themselves that you were fake. My beloved child, the message finally arrived. Your soulmate stared at the screen, knowing there was no turning back now. For months, they had hidden the one truth that had controlled every decision they made. They had never stopped loving you. But that was not the secret. The secret was that they had been afraid they were not worthy of being loved by you. They had convinced themselves that you would eventually discover their flaws, their fears, their past mistakes, and leave them. So they decided to leave first. They thought abandoning you would hurt less than being abandoned by you. But the psychic had uncovered something they had never understood. They had not been testing your love. They had been testing whether you would survive their rejection. And you had. That realization broke something inside them. They opened the message they had just sent you and read it again. I was afraid you would discover who I really am and realize you deserved someone better. So I tried to make you prove that you would never leave. When you stopped chasing me, I convinced myself you never cared. I hired someone to prove you were fake because believing you were real scared me more than losing you. Your soulmate put the phone down. For several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then your reply appeared. I never needed you to be perfect. I needed you to be honest. Those words made their eyes fill with tears. Because that was the one thing they had failed to give you. Honesty. They had given you silence instead of explanations. Distance instead of vulnerability. Suspicion instead of trust. And now they finally understood that love cannot survive forever when one person keeps asking the other to prove something they are too afraid to believe. Your soulmate immediately called the psychic. I told them everything. The psychic became quiet. Then let the truth breathe. What does that mean? It means you stop controlling the outcome. Your soulmate closed their eyes. What if they don't come back? Then you accept it. And if they do? Then don't repeat the same mistake. Those words stayed with them. For the first time, they understood that loving someone did not mean possessing them. It meant respecting their freedom. It meant accepting that forgiveness could not be demanded. It meant becoming trustworthy instead of constantly asking whether the other person could be trusted. Meanwhile, you were sitting alone, reading their confession again. You felt something inside you shift. Not because every wound suddenly disappeared. Not because everything was magically fixed. But because the mystery finally had an explanation. You had spent so long wondering why someone who seemed to care could behave as though you meant nothing. Now you understood. They had been afraid. But understanding someone's fear does not erase the pain they caused. So you did something important. You did not rush. You did not promise forever. You simply replied. If you want to speak to me, come with the truth. No games. No tests. No pretending. Your soulmate read those words. And for the first time, they smiled through their tears. Because you had not closed the door. But you had also stopped standing outside it, begging them to open it. That was the difference. The next day, they came to see you. There was no dramatic music. No perfect speech. No magical sign. Just two people sitting across from each other with everything they had avoided finally placed between them. Your soulmate looked at you. I was wrong. You said nothing. I hurt you. Still silence. I made you prove yourself when I should have trusted you. Your eyes became wet. Then they said the sentence that changed the entire conversation. I don't want you to prove that you love me anymore. I want to become someone who doesn't make you prove it. And something inside you softened. Not completely. Not instantly. But enough to allow hope back into the room. You told them about the nights you questioned yourself. The moments you wondered whether you were too much. The times you blamed yourself for their distance. They listened. They did not interrupt. They did not defend themselves. They simply listened. And that was perhaps the first real apology. Not words. Presence. When you finished, they looked down. I can't undo what I did. No, you replied. But I can stop repeating it. That was the beginning. Not a perfect ending. A real one. The psychic had not magically guaranteed that you two would spend forever together. She had revealed something more valuable. The truth. And the truth gave both of you a choice. You could remain trapped inside the old story. Or create something different. Your soulmate chose differently. They stopped testing you. They stopped searching for hidden betrayal. They stopped treating vulnerability like weakness. And slowly, trust began returning. Not because heaven forced it. Not because destiny removed every obstacle. But because two people finally stopped hiding behind fear. And perhaps that is the deepest message in this fictional story. Sometimes the person who doubts you most is not always doubting your heart. Sometimes they are terrified of their own heart. Sometimes people push away what they desperately want because accepting it would require them to become vulnerable. But never confuse someone's fear with your responsibility. You are not required to chase anyone. You are not required to convince anyone. You are not required to prove that your love is real to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Let truth reveal itself. Let actions speak. Let people show you who they are. And if someone returns, let them return differently. Your soulmate once hired someone to prove that you were fake. Instead, they discovered that the illusion was the fear they had built around your connection. They went searching for evidence against you. And found the truth about themselves. They expected to leave that room with permission to forget you. Instead, they walked out understanding why they could never forget you. And when they finally cried for hours, those tears were not simply about losing you. They were tears for every moment they had wasted being afraid. Every conversation they had avoided. Every chance they had thrown away. Every time they chose suspicion when honesty could have saved them. But the most beautiful part is this. They did not ask you to erase the past. They asked for the opportunity to build something better. And you did not surrender your boundaries to give them that chance. You simply opened your heart slowly. One honest conversation at a time. One action at a time. One day at a time. And that is where this fictional spiritual story ends. Not with a promise that every soulmate story must end in marriage. Not with a guarantee that every person who leaves will return. But with something far more powerful. Truth. Because when fear is finally exposed, love gets the chance to become honest. And if someone truly belongs in your life, they will not merely tell you they have changed. They will show you. They will communicate. They will respect your boundaries. They will stop making you audition for a place in their heart. And you, my beloved child, will no longer have to beg anyone to recognize your worth. You will know it yourself. So if this story found you at a strange moment, take the message gently. Do not chase. Do not panic. Do not force an ending. Let what is real reveal itself. Because what is meant to remain in your life will never require you to destroy yourself just to keep it. And remember the most important revelation of all. The psychic was hired to prove you were fake. But the greatest discovery was that your heart had been real all along. And sometimes, the truth does not arrive to bring someone back. Sometimes it arrives to set you free. Either way, you win. Because you finally stopped questioning whether you were enough. You were. You always were. And now the person who once doubted your heart finally knows it too.